Hey guys, tonight we dive into a story that's equal parts unsettling and oddly hilarious. Exactly what your sleepy brain didn't ask for. Imagine this: you're standing ankle-deep in something that smells suspiciously like old cabbage soup, swatting away gnats, and wondering if that weird wet spot on your cloak is just rain, or something more ominous. Welcome to Elizabethan London, land of bad plumbing, worse hygiene, and somehow, great theater. You trudge past shouting vendors, mangy dogs, and a suspiciously pale man selling authentic Spanish oranges that look like they've been through a war. There's a faint wail of a lute somewhere behind you, clashing violently with the sound of someone arguing about a stolen chicken. It's loud, chaotic, and smells like someone tried to boil socks in a horse stable. But this is where the magic happens. London's bustling playhouses, where actors became stars, audiences threw turnips mid-performance, and the only thing thicker than the accents was the cloud of body odor. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You ease your way through the Bankside crowd toward the Globe Theatre. It's not quite as romantic as they paint it in history books. Mud clings to your boots like it's auditioning for a role. Pickpockets dart through the crowd like squirrels with tiny daggers. And as you breathe in, the mix of smoke, fish, and what might be medieval sewage hits the back of your throat like a punch from a time traveler. Outside the Globe, the excitement is palpable. A group of street performers is reenacting a sword fight that quickly devolves into a juggling act, because, frankly, no one wants to see real blood again today. You edge closer, ducking past a merchant loudly hawking pies of a suspiciously indeterminate meat. The moment you step inside the yard area of the theater, standing room only, of course, it feels like you've entered an alternate dimension of humanity's weirdest shared hobby. Watching actors pretend to be kings while hoping they don't pass out from the heat and corsets. You're surrounded by groundlings, the penny-paying public who drink too much and laugh too loud. These are not your average theatergoers. Someone just spilled ale on your cloak and called it a blessing. Another person offers you a goose feather, for luck. You nod politely and back away slowly. The air is thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts and something much less pleasant. Let's just say someone forgot to invent deodorant. As the play begins, you notice the actors' wigs immediately. They're huge, ornate, and absolutely majestic, if you squint past the suspicious lice-shaped shadows. A tragic prince gestures dramatically, his golden curls bouncing under the torchlight, and you wonder, where did that hair even come from? Historians still argue whether audiences truly admired the wigs or merely tolerated them. But one thing is clear: in an era before dry shampoo or personal space, those things were status symbols. Itchy, smelly, potentially cursed status symbols. The lead actor flubs a line, and someone hurls a shriveled apple. It misses and smacks the stagehand instead, who doesn't even flinch. Clearly, this isn't his first fruit assault. The performance continues, the actors projecting with all the theatrical passion that a half-drunken, lice-infested crowd demands. You begin to notice that not all wigs are created equal. Some seem oddly stiff, like they were boiled and left out to dry next to someone's boots. Others have a disturbing realism. One particularly lustrous piece looks like it could start whispering secrets at any moment. That's when a gnawing question creeps into your mind. Where, exactly, did that human hair come from? Because wigs weren't synthetic back then. They didn't have plastic fibers or adjustable straps. No, these wigs were handcrafted masterpieces, made of real, often unwashed, human hair. And unless someone in Elizabethan London was really generous with their brush, you had to get those luscious locks from somewhere. Or someone. Cue the Resurrection Men, but we'll get to those guys later. Back to the audience. The crowd is loving it. There's laughter, clapping, a guy trying to propose mid-performance. He's booed off by a teenage fishmonger. One actor's wig starts sliding off mid-soliloquy, and he gracefully incorporates it into the act, pretending it's his long-lost lover. The crowd goes wild. Still, behind the curtain, the situation is less whimsical. Wigs are passed around between actors. Shared is a polite word. Reused until spiritually haunted is more accurate. One unlucky supporting actor scratches furiously through a scene about noble sacrifice. No one says anything. Everyone knows. The wig was a problem. You retreat slightly, overwhelmed by the sensory soup of the theater. As you step outside, a young boy in tattered clothes offers to sell you a lock of Shakespeare's real hair. It's clearly horsehair. You give him a copper anyway. At this point, you're beginning to realize that Elizabethan theater was held together by equal parts talent, filth, and a cultural tolerance for deeply unhygienic fashion. The stage may have shown, but behind it, the glue was literal. Boiled animal glue used to bind wigs together, sometimes with bits of scalp still clinging on. And you haven't even met the grave robbers yet. You're back inside the globe, leaning against a slightly sticky wooden post while the play rages on. The noble heroine just faked her death, classic, and the actor playing her is weeping dramatically through 3 inches of pearl-studded curls. It's a powerful performance, undercut slightly by the occasional wig scratch and what might be a flea casually rappelling down his neck. You shift your gaze to the backstage area, just barely visible behind the main platform. That's where the real drama is. Powder, pots, puffs, everything you need to look presentable in a time before skincare routines, or even soap, really. Elizabethan actors didn't just slap on a costume and go. No, they painted their faces like pastel corpses and hoped no one noticed the smell. You inch closer, catching sight of a cracked mirror propped against a barrel. A cluster of actors surrounds it, jostling elbows as they smear makeup across their faces with alarming enthusiasm. The stuff is thick and chalky, made from lead white, the same ingredient used in some of Queen Elizabeth I's own iconic looks. It gives the skin a pale, ghostly sheen. Beautiful, regal, mildly toxic. Actually, extremely toxic. Lead poisoning wasn't just a possibility, it was practically a professional hazard. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth knew her beloved Venetian ceruse, a combo of vinegar and white lead, was killing her slowly, or if everyone was just too polite to mention the faint blue tint her veins were taking on. You lean closer, and the smell hits you. Imagine expired flour mixed with vinegar and something vaguely metallic, like old coins that have been marinated in regret. That's lead-based makeup. And the actors are smearing it on like frosting on a very sad cake. Warts. Covered. Smallpox scars. Disguised. A suspiciously recent rat bite on the cheek? Dab some powder on it and hope for the best. Elizabethan skin wasn't so much dewy as it was determined to survive another day under a blanket of poison. One actor, a wiry man with a beard so patchy it looks like moss on a fence, picks up a rouge pot. Made from mercury. Lovely. He dabs it on, giving himself a flushed, just galloped across the moor to rescue you look. Or maybe it's more of a, just got back from a very emotional plague funeral vibe. Hard to say. There's a fringe fact here that's hard to ignore. Many stage cosmetics were actually adapted from remedies sold by apothecaries. The same ointment used to soften skin might also be used to treat scurvy, syphilis, or ghosts, depending on who you asked. No one really checked. If it burns, it's working, was the general philosophy. Now you're watching an older woman, possibly the costumer, stirring a pot of something thick and greenish. It bubbles in a way that suggests both herbal knowledge and imminent disaster. She's making eye paint, or at least something that'll make the actor's eyes pop under torchlight. It smells like rosemary, burnt parchment, and fear. A younger actor strolls past, wiping excess white from his neck. He sneezes. A puff of powder floats into the air like a sad little toxic cloud. You catch a whiff and instantly regret your curiosity. It tastes like dust and disappointment. Somewhere, a stagehand drops a wig into a basin filled with lavender water. At least, you think it's lavender. It might just be water someone whispered near a lavender bush last Tuesday. Regardless, it's not helping. The wig still smells faintly of something that used to be alive. In fact, a debate still brews among scholars about whether Elizabethan actors knew how dangerous their makeup was, or if they were too busy worrying about audience reactions to notice the slow decline of their organs. After all, when your job depends on looking attractive enough to sell tragedy to drunkards, you're willing to risk a few skin rashes. You move toward the edge of the curtain, peeking back at the stage. The tragic prince has finished his death monologue and collapsed, gracefully, into a heap of ruffled velvet. The crowd goes silent, reverent, until someone lets out an impressively loud belch. Respectful in its own way. Behind you, the actors are removing their makeup with stale bread. Yes, you heard that right. Stale bread was a common exfoliant/makeup remover. Just rub that crusty loaf over your face like a medieval clarisonic and call it a night. One actor holds up a piece of bread, shrugs, and takes a bite before rubbing the rest on his cheek. Multitasking at its most unhinged. Nearby, a small note is pinned to the wall, powder stocks low. Ask Marjorie for more chalk plus vinegar. Don't touch Master James's wig bucket again. Wig bucket. That sounds like a future horror story. You step outside for some air, though air might be generous. The mix of open sewers, horse dung, and human ambition doesn't exactly refresh your lungs. But at least it's better than the lead fumes inside. From this vantage point, you can see a troupe arriving from another playhouse. They're louder, rowdier, and sporting even worse wigs. One actor's makeup has slid halfway down his face, giving him the expression of a haunted mime. You hear snippets of gossip. Did you hear old Tommy got mercury rash again? The Queen's cousin fainted at the Rose, said the villain's wig was possessed. Someone nicked the rouge pot and now all their eyebrows fell off. And through it all, you realize something. Elizabethan theater wasn't just about passion and poetry. It was also about surviving your own beauty routine. Because when your eyeliner is a homemade potion and your foundation is essentially powdered poison, every curtain call is a victory. Back inside the wooden theater, you wipe a bit of soot from your sleeve, probably from brushing too close to a candlelit sconce, and make your way toward the actors' quarters. They call it a green room, though it's neither green nor particularly roomy. It's more of a tucked-away corridor filled with the sharp scent of sweat, rosemary sachets, and something that smells suspiciously like pickled eel. You sidestep a harried-looking boy carrying a tray of ale and bits of salted cheese. He nods at you before nearly colliding with a doorframe. It's a wonder anyone makes it out of here without stabbing themselves with a hatpin. The dressing area, if you can call it that, is a fevered dream of fabric. Racks of costumes lean precariously, organized not by roll but by how recently someone tried to patch a moth hole in them. Velvet cloaks droop over linen shifts, and doublets, those tightly fitted upper garments, hang like exhausted, fashionable ghosts. You duck as a man in his 40s tosses a ruff into the air. It lands on your head with a gentle poof. Congratulations, you're now nobility. He laughs and waves a comb like a dagger. Sheepskin and starch, my friend. More weapon than wardrobe. He's not wrong. Ruffs are stiff neckpieces made by starching and ironing loops of fabric until they resemble overly enthusiastic lasagna noodles. The process? Brutal. It involved dipping cloth in a mixture of starch, often made from flour and fermented urine, then drying it on heated irons called poking sticks. Not exactly spa-day material. You toss the ruff aside and glance down at a basket labeled spare cod pieces, handle with caution. You immediately decide not to touch it. Across the room, a young actor wrestles with a corset. He's playing a lady today, complete with stuffed hips and a wig styled like a pastry under siege. You watch as he adjusts the lacing, muttering, "Why do noble women breathe in thirds?" Historical fact incoming: actors in Shakespeare's time were exclusively male. Women weren't allowed on stage, so men and boys took on female roles, often exaggerating mannerisms to comedic or melodramatic effect. One famous actor, Edward Canaston, was so convincing as a woman that he drew fans both on and off the stage. He even reportedly had makeup tricks to make his skin appear softer under candlelight, egg whites and a soft cloth, if you're curious. Now imagine that in a building without air conditioning. Sweat trickles down the side of your neck as the cast prepares for the next act. A boy no older than 15 stands on a box, arms spread, while a seamstress threads a belt through a heavily embroidered jerkin. His cheeks are rouged, his expression resigned. He's about to be a tragic queen who dies of heartbreak. Or indigestion. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Suddenly, you hear a burst of laughter. Someone's found an old prop, a wooden skull used for Hamlet. They're using it like a puppet, making it scold a mop for bad soliloquy technique. The joke lands well. Even the actors who are busy tightening their hose chuckle through gritted teeth. Hose, by the way, were a nightmare. Imagine wearing high-waisted, skin-tight wool trousers that stop mid-thigh and require garters to stay up. Now imagine needing to dance, fight, and dramatically collapse in them. Actors spent as much time hoisting their pants as they did performing. Historians still debate whether early theater companies had uniform costume practices or whether they relied on recycled noble cast-offs and actor-owned pieces. Some evidence suggests wealthier patrons occasionally donated out-of-fashion outfits. Nothing says, "I support the arts," like handing over your great uncle's moth-eaten breeches. You turn to see a man brushing lint from his doublet with what looks like a dried fish tail. "Works better than anything else," he says cheerfully. You don't ask follow-up questions. In the corner, someone is oiling a prop sword. The blade gleams, though the hilt is wrapped in what looks like a torn piece of curtain. "Improvisation," he says proudly. "And thievery." A chorus member yanks open a chest labeled "Miscellaneous," "Accessories," "Plague Era." Inside, ratty wigs, a pair of papier-mâché boils, and a mask shaped like a crow's beak. It's a makeshift plague doctor costume. Technically not accurate for Elizabethan theater, but who's fact-checking in a world where ghosts talk and every other character is someone's long-lost cousin? Suddenly, a cry from the next room, "Marjorie!" Someone nicked the rouge pot again. You glance down. The little clay pot is beside your foot. You nudge it gently toward the shadows. Best not to get involved. More movement. Someone's pulling on a leather jerkin dyed a ghastly green. "I'm the forest spirit in Scene 5, he explains, "unless they cut me again. Then I'm the dead cousin in Scene 7. Versatility is key in this job. You're not just one character. You're whatever fits the costume. You might go from prince to stable boy to ghost in one afternoon, with nothing but a musty cape and a new accent to show for it. And here's a quirky tidbit. Actors sometimes used onions to produce tears on cue. Just slice a bit, rub it under the eyes, and weep your way into theatrical immortality, or a mild case of conjunctivitis. The noise swells. Someone bangs a pot, calling 5 minutes to curtain. The smell of sweat, starch, and stage fright mixes with anticipation. You slip out of the dressing space, ducking under a line of drying cuffs and into the corridor. A final glance back reveals the older actor now lecturing a nervous boy. If the wig slips, just pretend it's a ghost haunting your scalp. Sensible advice. Because in the world of Elizabethan theater, nothing ever went quite right. But if you looked good doing it, and didn't faint from the fumes, that was performance enough. You step out from the chaos of the dressing area and into a dimly lit hallway. Somewhere nearby, someone is rehearsing lines in a whisper that sounds more like a prayer than a soliloquy. You follow the curve of the passage until you find yourself behind the stage, standing amidst a maze of ropes, props, and pulleys, the unsung machinery that makes theatrical magic happen. There's an eerie stillness to it all. The crowd murmurs just beyond the thin wooden walls, and you can hear the occasional rustle of skirts, the stamping of impatient boots, and the clink of coins changing hands. It's not all applause and roses in this world. Theater is also commerce, gossip, and the odd thrown tomato if the lead flubs a line. You glance at the ropes dangling above, part of the fly system. These are used to lower in scenery, or a very bored-looking goddess on a swing. The term for it is a deus ex machina, Latin for God from the machine. It's a literal description. Someone in a harness dropped down to resolve the plot. Even back then, audiences rolled their eyes a little. You brush past a barrel labeled Sea Sound, which, as it turns out, is just a man with a sheet of tin and strong wrists. Beside him is a crate of thunderstones, wooden balls rolled down slanted troughs to mimic the sound of distant rumbles. Lightning. That's candlelight flashing behind painted clouds. And rain. Usually just peas in a drum. The ingenuity is charming, and honestly, a bit terrifying. This is live theater without safety nets. If a pulley breaks, a backdrop tears, or someone sneezes mid-monologue, there's no cut or retake. You're exposed. Literally, sometimes. Costumes rip. Wigs fall. Buttons betray you. You look up to the catwalk, where 2 boys are perched precariously, ready to drop paper feathers for an upcoming divine intervention scene. Neither looks particularly convinced gravity will do what it's supposed to. You give them a supportive thumbs up. They shrug. Theater is faith. A nearby actor is practicing a dramatic death. He collapses with flair, clutching at his chest like he's auditioning for the cover of a romance pamphlet. He lies still for a moment, then peeks with one eye. "Too much?" he asks. "Maybe drop the leg twitch," comes a reply from the shadows. You smile. This is the strange, wonderful rhythm behind every Elizabethan play, the heartbeat of backstage life. Then comes the whisper. Clear. Everyone moves like dancers in a well-practiced waltz. The actor playing a duke runs his thumb along the edge of a wooden goblet. A servant girl adjusts the tilt of her cap. You catch a glimpse of the lead, tall, noble brow, probably owed at least 2 shillings, muttering a soliloquy under his breath with the seriousness of someone performing surgery. A stagehand motions for quiet. The show is starting again. You slip behind a pillar, pressing close to a painted canvas tree. From here, you can just peek through the curtain slit to the stage beyond. The lights are all candles, hundreds of them, arranged in sconces, candelabras, and makeshift chandeliers. Their glow creates a golden haze, softening faces and hiding imperfections. It's theatrical Vaseline. On stage, a scene is unfolding between 2 noble characters in clashing hues of plum and mustard. The dialogue is sharp, filled with betrayal, longing, and that peculiar Elizabethan rhythm that feels like someone doing iambic push-ups. You marvel at the delivery. Every word lands, crisp and heavy. But you also know that under all this drama, the actor playing the betrayed prince is dealing with a mouth ulcer from bad wine and a cramp in his left calf from a too tight boot. Still, he doesn't falter. Historical fact break. The Globe Theatre had no stage lighting beyond the sun and candles, so all performances were held in daylight. The stage itself was partially covered by a roof called the Heavens, painted with stars and clouds. Trapdoors beneath allowed for surprise entrances and dramatic burials, or sudden disappearances, if someone forgot their lines. Suddenly, there's movement near the back of the theater. A vendor slips in selling oranges, candied ginger, and other snacks. Loudly, you hear the unmistakable slurp of someone biting into a boiled pear. This was common. Audience behavior ranged from polite attention to open heckling. People shouted, cheered, even threw food. You were never more than 1 missed punchline away from a bread crust to the head. Backstage, a boy dressed as a fairy preps for his entrance. His wings are made from chicken bones and tulle. He looks nervous. "You'll do fine," whispers a passing actress, adjusting the wreath on his head. The fairy nods once, then steps through the curtain. And in that moment, the illusion is whole. A stage of flickering candlelight. A child in wings. A line of poetry. And a crowd that, for a few seconds, believes in something impossible. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some shows, pigs were released onto the stage to symbolize chaos or rural charm. During one particularly chaotic performance of The Merry Wives of Windsor, a pig bit an actor and stole a piece of bread from his pocket. The audience gave it a standing ovation. Historians still argue whether such stunts were genius or just desperation with hooves. From your hiding place, you watch the second act wind to a close. Someone knocks over a goblet, accidentally, revealing a hidden letter inside. Gasps erupt from the audience. The villain twirls a mustache. The heroine faints like a falling curtain. Backstage, quiet celebration. The first half is nearly done. You ease away from the curtain, ducking behind a barrel marked, "Dragon Tail, do not sit." Your knees pop as you straighten up. You're not even in the cast, but this whole endeavor has you sweating like a lead actor in a winter scene with woolen tights and too many emotions. And just as the applause rises, a voice hisses from the darkness behind you, "Quick, can you sew?" You turn slowly. Someone is holding up a ripped sleeve. There's a performance changeover in 7 minutes. Of course you can sew. Right. You're handed a needle and a piece of thread with all the ceremony of a knight receiving a sword before battle. The actor, let's call him Geoffrey because he looks like a Geoffrey, has torn his sleeve in what he claims was a very intense fencing flourish. Judging by the frayed fabric and his sheepish look, it was more likely a stumble over a bucket backstage. You take the sleeve gingerly. The thread is thick, waxed, and stiff, more like cord than anything you'd call thread in modern terms. No one here is winning any embroidery competitions. But speed matters more than perfection. 3 minutes till scene change, someone calls. A bell rings in the distance. You perch on a stool next to a dusty rack of fake swords and bent halberds, threading the needle under the faint glow of a single candle stub. The wax drips perilously close to your boot, which now has a smudge of goose grease from an earlier props incident. Lovely. As you begin your impromptu seamstress duties, Geoffrey rambles nervously. "I once played Macbeth with a broken toe," he offers, as though that will inspire confidence. "Still hit my marks. Didn't cry once." You reply, making a clumsy stitch. The stitch holds. Theatre miracle. He continues. "This costume is from the Duke of Brambleford's collection. Apparently, he wore it during a Plague-era revival of The Tempest. Smells like it too." You pause your sewing for a moment, nose wrinkling. He's not wrong. It smells like mothballs and damp parchment. Or like a wardrobe that once hosted a very nervous ferret. As you make the final stitch, he strikes a dramatic pose, arm raised high. "How do I look?" "Like you fought 3 duels and lost 2 of them." He grins. "Perfect. Just in time." A backstage cue is shouted, "Tavern scene!" And Geoffrey bolts, flinging himself into character mid-stride. One moment a sweaty actor with a patchy beard, the next, a dashing rogue demanding ale and honor. You lean back, needle still in hand, as the sounds of raucous laughter echo from the stage. The tavern scene is a crowd favorite. It's rowdy, full of slapstick, and often involves someone falling into a barrel. Another historical fact for your mental scrapbook: Elizabethan audiences adored physical comedy. Slipping on pig fat, getting hit with a bread loaf, exaggerated fainting, this was high art. Slapstick was considered not just funny but cathartic, a sort of "we're all ridiculous together" experience. Even Shakespeare wasn't above a fart joke or two. Nearby, the beer girl, really just an apprentice holding a wooden mug of diluted cider, whispers, "Sometimes I forget the lines and just start singing bawdy songs." No one notices. You believe her. The applause swells again. The tavern scene has wrapped. A stagehand scrambles past you, lugging a sack labeled, "Fake heads, do not eat." You don't ask. Backstage is now a flurry of movement. Wardrobe changes. Prop resets. Someone's lost a shoe and is crawling under a bench muttering curses in Old French. You spot a child dressed as a rat clutching a script with both hands like it's a sacred text. You retreat to a quieter corner behind the stage, near the musicians. Yes, live music. A small ensemble plays from a gallery above or sometimes hidden off to the side. Lutes, viols, small drums, and pipes. They improvise stings and flourishes to match the emotion of the scene, a kind of Elizabethan soundtrack. The fiddler gives you a wink. "We're winging it tonight." You nod like that makes perfect sense. You sit for a moment beside a pile of extra costume bits, detached sleeves, discarded wigs, and one very suspiciously sticky ruff. Your shoulders relax, lulled by the music, the candlelight, and the odd comfort of controlled chaos. Here's a fun fringe tidbit. Theater superstition ran rampant. No whistling backstage. It was thought to summon spirits or jinx the play. Don't say the title of Macbeth aloud unless you want a mysterious accident. And never ever wear green on stage. It was said to attract fairies, and not the helpful kind. Historians still argue whether these superstitions originated from pagan traditions or simply from actors being overly dramatic. You muse aloud, surprising even yourself. Back on stage, the energy shifts. The next scene is solemn. A soliloquy about betrayal and unspoken love. The crowd falls quiet. You peek through the curtain again. The lighting now favors shadows, giving the whole stage a dusky, dreamlike atmosphere. The actor's voice is low, measured. He takes his time. Every pause feels like an inhale. You barely notice the girl next to you, maybe 13 years old, in a too large costume with fake braids pinned to her cap. "First time." You whisper. She nods, eyes wide. "You'll be fine." She doesn't answer but smiles nervously. Then someone whispers her cue, and she steps out onto the stage. She walks too quickly at first, but then slows as the scene takes her. Her lines are clear. Her presence, surprisingly calm. By the end, she gets a soft ooh from the audience, a genuine emotional reaction. That's gold in this world. You smile to yourself. Maybe you've witnessed the start of something. Suddenly, a crash. A backdrop has fallen. Someone screams, not from pain, just shock. A bucket of fake snow tips over. The scene halts. Everyone freezes. Then, the actor in the lead role improvises, "Ah, the gods weep at our folly." He gestures to the fallen snow with all the gravity of a bishop blessing a ham. The crowd laughs. Tension broken. The scene continues. This is theater. Not perfection, but resilience. It wobbles. It trips. But it never stops. And you, dear sleepdrifter, are part of this odd, candlelit dance. You're nearly trampled by a flurry of actors racing off stage, one weeping dramatically in character, another shouting about a missing prop dagger, not in character, and a third, still in mid-monologue, being gently tugged away by a harried stage manager hissing, "Wrong cue, Edgar, wrong cue." It's hard to tell what's real and what's theater anymore. You retreat further backstage, only to discover an area that looks like a cross between a broom closet and a shrine to chaos. Baskets of wigs, tins of rouge, jars of stage blood, and a disturbingly lifelike papier-mâché goat head. A sign overhead, handwritten in flour-smudged ink, reads, "Quiet Zone, Wardrobe Repairs and Existential Crises." You feel oddly at home. A boy of about 10 scuttles by with an armful of wooden apples. He drops one. You pick it up for him. "They're hollow," he whispers, shaking one. "So they don't break your toes if you drop them." Smart. Very smart. In the dressing room beyond, an elderly actor, Sir Reginald, as everyone calls him, though it's unclear if the title is self-bestowed, sits in front of a tarnished mirror, applying face paint with all the reverence of a priest performing a ritual. "Tonight," he intones, "I play the ghost of King Lydius. A role of whispers and vengeance." You nod solemnly. You've never heard of King Lydius, but Sir Reginald seems deeply committed to the vibe. He gestures to a nearby bench. "Sit, child. Learn the ancient ways." You perch politely, watching as he paints his face a ghastly gray, with hollow black eyes and lips tinged an eerie blue. He sniffs. Made from crushed violets and ash. Traditional ghost palette. Smells like funerals. You try not to gag. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan actors actually used plant-based makeup or just slathered their faces in whatever wasn't already growing mold, he adds, dabbing his chin with something that might once have been a mushroom. Around you, the transformation continues. Actors in the background swap identities like card tricks. One moment a weeping mother, the next a sword-wielding hero. A young woman adjusts her bodice and practices weeping into a kerchief. She catches your eye and grins, breaking the illusion. Tears are just spit, you know. You weren't ready for that. Another fringe detail you wouldn't find in textbooks. The stagehands double as sound effects artists. One is clapping coconut shells to mimic horse hooves. Another slaps a wet towel rhythmically for thunder. You hear a shrill whistle and duck instinctively. Storm scene, someone mutters. Watch for the lightning cloth. A large canvas painted with jagged white streaks is yanked down in a dramatic flutter. Someone flashes a candle behind it. It's primitive, but surprisingly effective. You squeeze past a wooden pillar and end up face-to-face with the director. Not that he'd call himself that. He's more master of revels, with a flair for shouting and theatrics. He eyes you suspiciously. "You're the Stitcher." "Among other things," you reply. "Good." One of the musicians just collapsed. "You play anything?" "The triangle." He blinks. "You'll do. You're percussion now." Before you can protest, you're handed a tambourine and shoved toward the musician's nook. There, you meet a lute player with wild eyes and a girl playing a recorder like it's a dagger fight. "We improvise," she says. "Everything's in D minor tonight. Very moody." A whispered cue. The next act begins. You peek through the curtains. A solemn scene. A forest glade. Painted trees wobble gently. The heroine, dressed in a green velvet gown, with a ketchup stain from dinner, sings a mournful melody. Your tambourine quivers in your hand. You resist the urge to join in. Instead, you become part of the moment, one foot tapping, breathing in time with the music. You're starting to get it. And just when the moment grows too serious, a line goes sideways. The heroine forgets her words and freezes. A long pause. Then she blurts, "I must go feed the owls." The audience howls with laughter. Someone from the rafters hisses, "Play it off. Dance, dance." She begins twirling, arms out, calling for owls. And somehow, the scene transforms. Another actor joins her, improvising owl noises. You hear someone in the crowd yell, "More owls!" It becomes a comedic highlight. None of it was planned. All of it was perfect. Backstage, the laughter roars through the floorboards. The girl playing the recorder whispers, "We're legends now." The owl scene is immortal. You nod in reverence. There's something in the air now, a shift. Everyone feels it. The second half of the play is starting. The crowd is warm, forgiving, enchanted. The actors are looser, more playful. Lines fly, jokes land, and timing clicks like gears in an old clock. From your corner with the musicians, you watch as the plot reaches its climax. A betrayal. A duel. A mysterious letter revealed. One actor dramatically reveals a second face painted beneath his mask. The crowd gasps. Even you gasp. That was clever. Another historical tidbit: Elizabethan audiences were not passive. They booed. They cheered. They shouted advice. Theater was sport and social commentary all at once. The closer they sat to the stage, the rowdier they got. And tonight's crowd? Positively rowdy. You marvel at the noise, the chaos, the candlelight, and the strange family of oddballs you've somehow become part of. And you wonder, is this what Athena had in mind with her olive tree? Art, legacy, chaos, growth, even in a dingy, smoky playhouse? Maybe. The play ends with a thunderous cheer, somewhere between genuine applause and the sound of people clapping just loud enough to cover their yawns and justify staying through the final act. The lead actor bows so deeply he nearly topples off the stage. Someone throws a leek at him in appreciation. He catches it, kisses it, and holds it aloft like a trophy. You step back behind the curtain, the tambourine still clutched in your slightly trembling hands. It's been 2 hours of fast costume changes, last-minute script improvisations, and a healthy dose of accidental slapstick. Your favorite moment was probably when the villain tripped over the plastic goat head and pretended it was part of the scene. "Even the beasts of the field reject me," he'd shouted. The crowd loved it. Someone hands you a lukewarm mug of spiced cider, and you sip it while leaning against a wardrobe trunk. It's sticky, too sweet, and inexplicably fizzy, but it hits the spot. The actors are unpeeling their costumes like onions now. Sweat-darkened tunics, wigs askew, face paint smeared into accidental modern art. The mood is somewhere between exhaustion and triumph. A few are already discussing tomorrow's performance. One woman with an impressive fake beard is trying to explain how her elbow got dislocated mid-scene and popped back in during a death spiral. "It made a sound like a bag of frogs," she says proudly. You don't know what that means, and you don't ask. Outside, the audience filters out into the night. Some are already debating what parts were historically accurate. One particularly loud man insists that duels were never fought with breadsticks, while his friend argues, that's what made it brilliant. The night cools. The torches burn low. And you realize, you're still in Athens. Ancient Athens. And the olive tree is still very much the center of this strange little world. You head out of the theater, following a narrow alley that snakes uphill toward the Acropolis. The hilltop glows softly in the moonlight, like a marble dream. As you climb, your legs ache in the most satisfying way. Past the crumbling stone stairway and fig sellers packing up their stalls, you come to a quiet little courtyard where a statue of Athena looms over a gnarled olive tree. This is it. The original. Or at least the sacred offspring of the original. It's smaller than expected. But older. The trunk is thick, like it's been twisted by time itself. Its bark looks like wrinkled hands clasped together. And its leaves whisper in the breeze, long, slender, silvery green. You sit beneath it. The marble is cool beneath you. You sip the last of your cider and exhale slowly. Historians still argue whether this exact tree is descended from Athena's mythical gift, or simply a really, really old olive that got great PR. But it hardly matters. People have believed in it for centuries, worshipped it, protected it, even waged lawsuits over it. And that, of course, brings you to the land dispute. The real estate quibble of the gods. You'd think that the Parthenon, the theater, or even the temples would be the hot-button properties in ancient Athens. But no. It was this tree. This little cluster of roots and myth. According to fringe Athenian records, mostly passed down through gossipy scrolls and temple archives, A local priest claimed the land around the tree had been gifted to his family by a prophetic owl. The owl, naturally, was believed to be a divine messenger from Athena herself. And what owl-given land could possibly be taxed? The city disagreed. A heated trial ensued, complete with olive oil bribery, two very dramatic reenactments of the original contest between Poseidon and Athena, both actors playing Poseidon tripped over the same rock, and an unprecedented 4-hour closing statement by a man dressed as a talking amphora. The tree, throughout, was unmoved. Eventually, the land was declared sacred and tax-neutral, meaning the priest's family didn't have to pay anything, but also couldn't build a souvlaki stand next to it, which, by all accounts, was the original plan. And so the tree remained, preserved through wars, empires, and climate shifts. A quirky footnote here. During one Roman invasion, the olive tree was reportedly cut down by accident, then mysteriously regrew the next morning. Skeptics claimed the Romans just pruned it too aggressively. Believers insisted it was proof of Athena's wrath. Personally, you lean toward the explanation involving a very nervous gardener and a lot of glue. Tonight, the city sleeps. But the olive tree remains. Its shadow stretches toward the marketplace like it's reaching for something lost. You start to notice other things now. Faint murmurs of conversation in the wind, laughter drifting from a rooftop, the scent of roasted chestnuts far off. The stars overhead are bright, almost too bright, like someone's over-adjusted the settings. And you think, maybe the real battle wasn't between Athena and Poseidon after all. Maybe it was between permanence and change. Between the roar of the sea and the rooted stillness of the land. Athena planted a tree. Poseidon made waves. But it was the tree that stayed. You pull your cloak tighter around you and let the quiet of the moment settle over your bones. No audience. No stage. No clashing gods. Just you, a centuries-old olive tree, and a strange sense of peace. A soft hoot echoes through the olive branches. You glance up, and sure enough, an owl is perched near the top, blinking at you like it's seen everything. Maybe it has. The Athenians considered owls sacred, omens of wisdom and battle readiness. But this one just looks mildly annoyed you're still sitting under its favorite branch. You offer it the last sip of your cider. It declines, with a shuffle of feathers that reads, "No thanks, peasant." Fair enough. You stretch out on the marble and stare up at the stars. You wonder if any of the philosophers ever did the same. Did Socrates lie here after a long day of Socratic methodology? Did Plato ever sneak out of the academy for a midnight think under Athena's tree? Probably not. But imagining it is half the fun. The more you learn about history, the clearer it becomes. People were always ridiculous. Even the great ones. Maybe especially the great ones. That's what makes it so comforting. You think of the theater again, the way the actors fumbled and thrived in equal measure, how everything somehow came together in the end. Or at least ended. That's history. A mess of good intentions, mixed signals, botched cues, and someone always yelling about owls. And yet, it endures. Through plays and politics, myth and bureaucracy, temple priests and teenage stagehands. The olive tree, Athena's prize, was never about dominance. It was about presence. Staying power. Roots. Maybe it didn't win the flashiest battle. But it did win the long game. That's a kind of wisdom too. A sudden breeze rustles the leaves above, like a whisper from the goddess herself. Go to sleep already. You nod, closing your eyes. The marble beneath you isn't exactly a featherbed, but it'll do. You've earned a nap. Besides, you've got temple repairs in the morning. And apparently, you're percussion now. The owl flutters its wings once, then settles in. Somewhere in the distance, a lute plays a lullaby. Someone drops a prop dagger. Someone else shouts, "That's not your line." But you're already fading. Athens hums around you, ancient and alive, humming with stories. And in the olive-scented dark, you dream not of battles or gods, but of laughter backstage. Of tambourines and owl improv. Of a little tree that outlasted an empire. You wake, or rather, drift, into another scene. This time, the theater's behind you, and you're walking toward the Agora, Athens' central marketplace. The sun is lazier now, casting long shadows, making marble gleam like polished teeth. You're still in costume, a toga slightly too short, with smudged stage paint on your cheek. Not that anyone cares. This is Athens. Everyone's performing something. You pass merchants arguing about grain prices and philosophers arguing about arguing. It's like walking through Twitter, but everyone's barefoot. Your destination isn't a stall or a school today. It's the Areopagus, the rocky hill of Mars. A place of trials, judgments, and occasional shouting matches. Think Supreme Court, but with sandals and no microphones. You're not here to testify. You're here because there's yet another olive tree-related dispute, and this one's gotten legal. Apparently, the descendants of some long-forgotten priestess claim ownership over the grove where Athena's original tree supposedly sprouted. A rival family, who swear they're descended from Poseidon's stable boy, is counterclaiming. And yes, it's ridiculous. But in ancient Athens, land ownership was tied up with piety, politics, and ancestor worship. People could, and did, go to court over sacred rocks. You settle onto a stone bench, eavesdropping shamelessly. One man is waving a chipped amphora in the air like it's Exhibit A. This vessel was buried beneath the roots. It's proof of ancient rights. The judge, or rather magistrate, narrows his eyes. Or proof that someone forgot their lunch. A ripple of laughter. But the plaintiffs not deterred. In ancient Athens, trials were public theater. Citizens served as massive juries, sometimes hundreds strong. There were no lawyers, just loud, persuasive men pleading their cases with a lot of dramatic arm-waving and, if possible, tearful appeals to their dead grandmothers. You half expect a chorus to break out behind the podium. No such luck. Instead, you get a lecture. One magistrate leans in, explaining how land grants tied to sacred trees were legally binding. Unless, of course, the tree was deemed a public religious symbol, in which case it couldn't be privately owned. Historians still argue whether sacred groves like Athena's could be enclosed for personal use, he says, almost to himself. You nod politely, as though you hadn't just been daydreaming about olives stuffed with feta. Still, the whole mess has you thinking. This tree, the mythic one, Athena's gift, isn't just a symbol. It's a spark. A root that twisted into laws, rituals, real estate, even legal headaches. An olive tree caused this chaos. Or, more accurately, the meaning people poured into it did. Because in ancient Athens, belief didn't stay in temples. It seeped into everything: politics, architecture, meal planning. A god's whim might decide a street layout. A myth could change tax policy. Which is hilarious and terrifying. You glance back at the bickering families. One woman is holding up a tiny statuette of Athena, shaking it like it's proof. Another is shouting about sea horses. You lean toward the owl perched nearby. 10 drachmas says they settle out of court. The owl blinks. Probably doesn't gamble. Still, you stay until dusk. The magistrates argue, the plaintiffs plead, and the olive trees, real ones, rustle indifferently behind them. They've seen all of this before. You stroll home as the last light catches the Acropolis in gold. The streets are quieter now, the city resting after its daily performance. You pause near a small shrine, nothing grand, just a carved owl and a few waxy olives in a dish. You leave a figure. Not for luck. Not for law. Just for presence. Because in this strange, noisy, glorious place, even the smallest offerings have stories. You wake again, or rather roll over onto the softer side of the dream. The city hums in your bones now. You've done the courts, the shrines, the theaters. But tonight, you're slipping into something a little more sacred. You're at the base of the Acropolis, staring up at its shimmering crown. The Parthenon looms above like a divine jewelry box, every column gleaming like marble teeth. You begin the slow climb, not a pilgrimage exactly, but it feels like one. The steps are worn smooth from centuries of sandals. Your own are flapping a bit, borrowed, as always. As you climb, you pass others, priests, temple workers, sleepy guards with olive branch staves. One is arguing with a goat. Eventually, you reach the top. And there it is, the ancient, twisted, wind-battered olive tree. Not the one replanted after a fire or brought in as a symbol. No, this one is the tree, or so they say. The very first olive tree, sprouted from Athena's victorious spear in her showdown with Poseidon. It's roped off, of course. You can't just go poking the city's origin story. The air up here is thinner, quieter. The city spreads below you like spilled ink. You sit on a warm stone ledge, pretending not to listen as a young guide recounts the myth to some tourists. She struck the ground, he says, and this olive tree sprang up, gifting shade, oil, and fruit, proof she cared for the people. One tourist raises a hand. Did Poseidon really flood the place? The guide shrugs. Hard to say. Historians still debate whether the flood myth refers to an actual storm, a seaquake, or just Athenian propaganda. You smirk. Even up here, myths are part history, part PR campaign. Now, this sacred tree, what makes it so special isn't just the legend. It's what it became, a legal monument, a religious relic, and even a political statement. The olive tree stood beside the Erechtheion, a temple devoted to multiple gods and mythic ancestors, making it the spiritual Venn diagram of Athens. It wasn't just for decoration. It symbolized Athena's ongoing presence and protection, which meant the tree had its own priestess, its own rights, and, get this, its own insurance policy. You hear that right. If the tree burned down or was damaged in war, it had to be replaced immediately. Like a sacred statue or eternal flame, the tree wasn't allowed to not exist. So if anything ever happened to it, a sapling from the same rootstock would be planted in its place. Talk about a high-maintenance houseplant. You lean a little closer to the rope and inhale. It doesn't smell like much, maybe faintly of dust and leaves and history. But still, you imagine the first Athenian citizen standing here, staring at this new symbol of divine favor, wondering what it all meant. And if it meant a property tax hike. Because here's the quirky part, ownership of land near the tree came with serious strings. You couldn't just build a tavern next door. Anything near the sacred tree was tied to temple protocols. No noisy parties, no sacrificial mishaps, and definitely no lawsuits without divine permission. That last part? Not a joke. Ancient legal records mention disputes over who could even walk near the tree, let alone touch it. Certain festivals required it be garlanded. Others forbade even looking directly at it on unlucky days. You lean back and squint. A young couple is taking a selfie with the tree in the background, unaware that 2,500 years ago, that would have earned them a fine, a lecture, and possibly a goat-based punishment. Your toga itches. You scratch your shoulder and gaze up at the Parthenon. Inside, the statue of Athena once towered, gold and ivory, armed and radiant. Outside, the tree stood humble, gnarled, quietly powerful. You think it's funny. The gods who shouted loudest, Poseidon with his trident, Zeus with his lightning, lost the long game to a goddess who planted something. She didn't blast or conquer. She gave. A tree. A gift. A future. It changed everything. And yet, for centuries, Athenians debated how it changed things. Was the olive tree a contract between goddess and city? A metaphor for civic growth? Or a power play to keep the masses inspired by something tangible? You stretch, yawn, and imagine being a sleepy Athenian philosopher. You'd call it symbolic permanence, or divine bureaucracy. Then you'd trip over your robe. The wind picks up. Olive leaves tremble like whispers. A guard nearby adjusts his belt. You wave awkwardly and head down the hill, shoes flapping. Your descent feels different. Slower. Quieter. Below, the agora flickers with torchlight. Distant laughter. Echoes of flute music. The real city breathes in shadow while the myths remain, rooted high above, always watching. And the tree. Still standing. You return to the agora, drifting like a stray breeze through Athens at twilight. The sacred olive tree fades behind you, replaced now by the bustle of more earthly things. Traders packing up their stalls, dogs sniffing at dropped figs, and the distant thump of someone trying to carry too many amphorae at once. You're heading toward an area less visited by storytellers. Not the temples or schools. Not the courts or colonnades. You're aiming for the legal archives, though let's be honest, calling it an archive is generous. It's more like a glorified closet of wax tablets and wine-stained verdicts. This is where the real estate mess starts to get juicy. See, after Athena's olive tree rooted itself into Athenian identity, the city did what cities always do. It built around it. But how do you build around a miracle? Carefully. And bureaucratically. The land surrounding the tree was declared sacred. And in Athens, Sacred meant complicated. You couldn't just build, plant, sell, or sneeze near it without jumping through divine legal hoops. In fact, one of the earliest zoning laws in history may have been crafted to protect this very grove. You wander into a small courtyard, where a few scribes are arguing over a cracked slate. That plot belonged to Melanthios. No, he leased it from the Archon Basilius, and his cousin's donkey grazed on it illegally. You sidle past, not wanting to get roped into Athenian property drama. Here's where it gets messy. While Athena's tree was sacred, it sat right on land that people still technically owned. Or thought they did. Which meant if someone wanted to build, say, a bathhouse or a bakery, they had to submit a petition, not just to the city, but also to the temple authority that maintained the tree. Imagine trying to get building permits from a goddess. There's no fast-track queue. And certainly no refunds. Even worse, disputes over these lands could drag on for decades. One poor fellow tried to put up a small altar to Hermes near the tree, thinking, gods helping gods, but the priestess of Athena threatened to exile him unless he paid a hefty fine. Not for the altar itself, but for aesthetic disruption. Aesthetic. In the 5th century BCE. That's the ancient version of being told your hedge is too tall by the homeowners association. And of course, the courts were split. Some jurors argued that the tree was communal, it belonged to all Athenians, and therefore the land around it should be shared too. Others insisted it was temple land, which gave it a different tier of legal protection. Historians still argue whether this legal ambiguity was deliberate, engineered to give religious officials more leverage, or whether it was just the result of centuries of paperwork pile-up. Either way, the olive tree became not just a symbol, but a landmine. You settle onto a bench as two men walk by, deep in whispered debate. Just build the bathhouse further uphill. But that's Poseidon's spring. I'm not risking a curse for hot water. You stifle a laugh. This was more than just zoning. It was a cosmic turf war. Poseidon's salt spring and Athena's olive tree existed within feet of each other on the Acropolis. Two divine claims to one patch of land. No wonder Athenians spent centuries tiptoeing around it like it was rigged with celestial tripwires. And let's not forget the taxes. Oh yes. The moment a property brushed up against sacred territory, it got hit with levies, what they euphemistically called offerings. One fringe account even claims that some landowners built fake shrines nearby just to qualify for religious exemptions. That's right, ancient tax fraud, with laurel wreaths and everything. You walk past an old wooden sign warning, "Keep 6 cubits from the grove." The paint's chipped, but the message is clear. This isn't just a tree. It's a boundary marker. A sacred firewall. And getting too close. Risky. One young woman passes by, arms loaded with scrolls, muttering to herself. No, the priestess doesn't overrule the magistrate unless the moon is waxing. You give her a supportive nod. You've been there. Legal nightmares are eternal. In all this, one thing becomes clear. The olive tree, while small and silent, dictated much of the Acropolis structure. It bent architecture around it. It reshaped laws. It determined which alleys were built, which buildings needed divine permits, and which poor vendors had to relocate because their fig stall cast shade onto holy roots. And yet, somehow, it stayed rooted. Through fires, wars, occupations. Through Romans and Byzantines. Through philosophers who scoffed and emperors who nodded politely while carving their names into stones. Maybe that's the real miracle. Not that Athena gave the city a tree, but that the Athenians took it seriously, for thousands of years. You rise and walk toward a quiet garden on the edge of the Acropolis. There's another olive tree here, not the olive tree, but a descendant. You sit beneath it and feel the way the sun filters through the leaves, dappling the dusty stones in patterns that look suspiciously like legal contracts. You close your eyes. Somewhere, far off, a gavel slams in ancient frustration. You wonder if Athena ever regrets gifting something so negotiable. You shift beneath the descendant tree, stretching your legs out over sun-warmed flagstones, when a slight breeze carries voices from nearby. Not shouts or proclamations, more like soft singing. You rise, curiosity tugging you forward, and wander through a narrow archway toward the heart of the city once more. It's here, amidst the hum of domestic life, that you find something else sprouting from the olive tree legacy, Economy. Because let's be clear, Athena's gift wasn't just symbolic. It was highly profitable. Olive oil in ancient Greece was the stuff of legend. Literally. Used for cooking, lighting lamps, moisturizing limbs, blessing warriors, and bribing oracles. One scholar even joked that the average Athenian probably bled olive oil if you poked them with a stylus. You stroll past a stall where a young boy is helping his grandmother pour oil into narrow ceramic flasks. Not too much, Leandros. This is for temple use, she chides. He rolls his eyes in the ancient Greek equivalent of a teenage sigh. This oil wasn't just any oil, it came from sacred groves known as the Morii, all allegedly descended from Athena's original tree. These groves were state-protected, managed with the same seriousness modern governments reserve for military secrets or national archives. Tampering with a Moria tree? Punishable by exile. Or worse, by being forced to explain yourself to a crowd of deeply unimpressed philosophers. Historians still argue whether the oil from these trees was chemically different, richer, perhaps, or infused with some divine essence, or whether the mystique was entirely a matter of branding. Regardless, it fetched a premium price, both in local markets and far-off colonies. You watch a potter painting tiny olive branches on a tall amphora. For Syracuse, he tells a passing friend. They like it fancy there. Athens didn't just keep this miracle for itself, it exported it. Amphorae filled with sacred oil traveled across the Aegean, each stamped with the city's emblem, Athena's owl. That little bird became a symbol of quality assurance. Think ancient USDA organic, but with more feathers and less regulation. The state even used oil as currency. Victorious athletes at the Panathenaic Games received amphorae full of the good stuff as prizes, sometimes over 100 jars worth. That's a lifetime supply of salads and massage treatments, or a very slippery retirement plan. As you wander through a quiet alley, you pass a gymnasium where a few sweaty young men are slathering themselves in oil. One of them gestures with exaggerated flair, "May Athena bless these biceps." You smile. It's absurd, but also kind of brilliant. That's the thing about the olive tree. It wasn't just a religious symbol or a political football. It became the root of an entire economic ecosystem. From agriculture to trade, from cosmetics to religious rites, everything was olive-tinted. If Athena had given the city, say, a golden rabbit instead, Athens might have gone a very different direction. Though the idea of rabbit-based skincare is oddly compelling. You pass a shrine where tiny terracotta models of olive branches have been left as offerings. One has a small inscription, "For success at market." Another simply says, "Let the price stay high." Even the thieves got involved. There's a famous case in the Athenian courts involving a man caught digging around a Moria grove at night. When questioned, he claimed he was searching for buried wisdom. Right. That wisdom just happened to grow on trees and smell faintly of vinaigrette. The court didn't buy it. He was fined and banished from harvesting olives for a year, a sentence equivalent to economic ruin in those days. Fringe accounts even suggest olive oil was used in secret political dealings. Messages smuggled in hollowed-out olive pits. Bribes handed over in oil-drenched handshakes. Ancient espionage, with a fruity twist. You pause near a row of storage jars, each sealed with wax and stamped with Athena's sigil. There's something oddly comforting about it. As if the goddess herself personally blessed every jar. She didn't, obviously. Even divine productivity has its limits. But still, the illusion worked. And it worked for centuries. You duck into a workshop where women are grinding olives with stone wheels. One of them glances up and smiles. "Careful, don't slip. We've lost enough philosophers to oily floors already." There's laughter. The good kind. The kind that comes when people are proud of their work, even if their deity of choice once punched a sea god in the face to get the job. You realize, in that moment, that the olive tree wasn't just a divine prank or a sacred sapling. It was infrastructure. Culture. A small, leafy powerhouse that helped build an empire, not through conquest, but through export. You step outside again, blinking in the fading light. Somewhere behind you, a flute begins to play, soft and slow. A boy rushes by carrying a jug almost as big as he is. "It's for the feast," he calls over his shoulder. "We're making cake." You arch a brow. Olive oil cake? Bold. But then again, when Athena's your city's patron, you make it work. Word count: 1087. You leave the bustle of the oil-stained streets behind and slip down a narrow marble corridor, a path once used by priests and politicians alike, each hoping to whisper their troubles to someone who mattered. The walls are quiet now, save for the echo of your own footsteps and the faint creak of ancient stone under sun-scorched weight. As you wander deeper, a peculiar scene unfolds. You find yourself inside what appears to be a courtroom. Not the modern kind, with suits and objections and dramatic plot twists, but something far more public and slightly more theatrical. Welcome to the Athenian Agora, where the olive tree's legacy turned from sacred asset into serious litigation. Yes, you've stumbled into the olive-flavored legal mess Athena left behind. You take a seat on a worn stone bench as two men argue loudly over the fate of a tree. Not just any tree, mind you. A Moria. One accuses the other of pruning it too aggressively. "That limb was sacred," he bellows. The accused shrugs. "It was blocking my goat." The judge, an older man with eyebrows like storm clouds, sighs heavily. You're witnessing a real estate dispute, ancient Athens style. Turns out, once the city accepted that Athena's tree was sacred, it also had to accept a whole bureaucratic ecosystem to protect it. Inspectors, called episkopoi, roamed the countryside, checking on state-owned trees. If a Moria tree looked sad, sick, or suspiciously trimmed, someone had to answer for it. The olive tree wasn't just holy, it was heavily regulated. Historians still argue whether these inspectors were genuinely concerned for divine ecology or if they just enjoyed having a reason to yell at farmers. And it wasn't just individual trees causing drama. Land ownership became complicated. If you owned the land around a sacred tree, did you also own the olives it dropped? Could you build a wall near it? Could your neighbor's goat nibble its leaves? Spoiler: these questions ended up in court far more than you'd expect. You overhear a woman whispering nearby. "My cousin once lost half a vineyard because the roots crossed property lines. Said Athena wanted her share." Her friend snorts. "Athena doesn't drink wine." You glance at the scene again. Both disputing parties are now red-faced, the judge has gone glassy-eyed, and a boy in the corner is sketching the whole affair on a wax tablet with barely concealed glee. Ancient gossip fodder. The tree, it seems, was no longer just a symbol, it was a political landmine. Some property disputes reached the Areopagus, the High Court of Athens, where laws and mythology collided like chariots in a blindfolded race. The idea of mortals arguing over the deity's gift made for lively, if exhausting, civic drama. There's even an old tale, half true, half theatrical, about a man who claimed a new olive tree had sprouted in his garden overnight. He insisted it was a divine clone, born from Athena's original root system. The city disagreed. Loudly. The man eventually fled to Corinth. His tree, reportedly, bore no fruit. Fringe tidbits suggest that during drought years, citizens blamed bad harvests not on the weather, but on improper treatment of the Morii. One inscription reads, "The gods are displeased, we failed to honor the bark last season." You imagine someone ritually apologizing to a tree. With flowers. Possibly chocolates. You continue walking, and pass another gathering, this time at a symposium, where oil magnates and philosophers trade olive gossip over diluted wine. One man leans forward. "Did you hear? A grove near Piraeus was declared illegal. Built over a buried shrine." Another replies, "And they wonder why Poseidon sends storms." It becomes clear to you that divine gifts, especially profitable ones, are rarely simple. Athena's olive tree had created jobs, yes. Inspired trade, absolutely. But it had also birthed a labyrinth of property rights, civic tension, and enough paperwork to drive a scribe to tears. You picture Athena watching it all unfold from her marble pedestal atop the Acropolis. Perhaps bemused. Perhaps mildly smug. After all, she hadn't just won the city. She'd bound it to her tree with roots deeper than law itself. A few steps away, you find a group of children playing a game called Steal the Grove, where one pretends to be a sacred olive tree, and the others try to build tiny houses around them without getting caught. "Objection!" one yells. "You can't build a toilet on holy ground." You smile. Even the games are bureaucratic. You pass by a mural on a cracked wall, Athena holding an olive branch aloft, her expression equal parts noble and exasperated. Below her, a scribe crouches beside a tree, furiously recording olive weight estimates on a scroll as goats wander past. The mural's caption, "May she bless our roots and our receipts." And truly, that about sums it up. The olive tree had become a kind of civic mirror. What began as divine favor turned, over time, into real estate squabbles, trade policy, land inspections, and complicated legacies. It rooted itself into law as deeply as it had into soil. And you, dear wanderer, get the feeling that if Athena had known just how tangled her gift would become, she'd probably have added a lawyer to her pantheon. The sun begins to dip toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the dusty stones of the Athenian streets. But your feet keep moving, drawn now to the temple of Hephaestus, a place where you suspect more than just divine metalwork was forged. Because here, under Athena's watchful olive gaze, you're about to meet someone who had a surprisingly large role in this tree-tangled tale, the humble olive oil merchant. You push aside a hanging linen curtain and find yourself in a small warm shop filled with amphorae stacked like sleepy sentinels. The smell hits you immediately, earthy, bitter, sharp. Olive oil, rich and fresh, as if Athena herself had bottled the stuff an hour ago. A short man with ink-stained fingers waves you in. "Welcome. Are you here for the Athena's Tears blend? Or something less holy?" He chuckles at his own joke and hands you a small vial to sniff. It smells like pepper and the sun. You sip, because why not? And suddenly you understand why this golden liquid became more than a condiment. Olive oil was everything. Fuel, food, moisturizer, medicine, and, believe it or not, a prize. Every 4 years in Athens, the Panathenaic Games were held in honor of, you guessed it, Athena. Victors in events like boxing, wrestling, or the infamous chariot race didn't just get a leafy crown. They were awarded huge amphorae filled with sacred olive oil, tapped directly from Athena's Morii trees. The stuff was worth a fortune. Like winning gold bars, but greasier. Historians still argue whether these games were more about worship or prestige economics, but most agree. When your city's patron goddess literally grows your prize money, you know you're living in a special kind of city-state. The shopkeeper shows you a prized amphora from 510 BCE, stamped with the image of Athena in full armor, standing stiffly as if daring anyone to question the purity of its contents. He leans closer. They say the oil in these was never used. Just stored. Worshipped. Like a relic. You nod, imagining some poor athlete winning a jug of sacred oil and then realizing he can't cook with it, can't sell it, can't even taste it. You get divine bragging rights, the shopkeeper says. But zero flavor. You meander to a side room, where women sit pressing olives with slow, meditative rhythm. One tells you that the press hasn't changed in centuries. Stone basin, wooden beams, donkey power if you're lucky. Another woman laughs. "My cousin used a goat once. Never again." A fringe rumor surfaces here, that certain temples used olive oil not only for offerings but also to anoint sacred statues. Athena's armpits must have glistened, one woman jokes, and they all dissolve into sleepy giggles. And while it might sound ridiculous now, the oil was often burned in ceremonial lamps, especially in the Erechtheion, where Athena's sacred olive tree stood. You picture worshippers in hushed procession, lighting tiny clay lamps, olive-fueled and flickering, casting dancing shadows of Athena across marble columns. But the real twist. Olive oil was taxed. Yep. The city tracked production, required export licenses, and even monitored adulteration. Fake oil was a serious crime. One merchant in 430 BCE was exiled for diluting his stock with sheep fat. He called it extra rustic, someone murmurs. As you walk through the city's market square, you spot a legal notice nailed to a pillar. Any merchant caught selling state oil as private stock shall be fined 1,000 drachmae. That's like fining someone a luxury home for watering down your salad dressing. Olive oil wasn't just part of the economy, it was the economy. From its divine origin sprang not just trees but entire industries. Farming, shipping, trading, pottery, ritual, and regulation. And naturally, competition. A lesser-known rivalry brewed between Athens and other oil-producing cities. Corinthians boasted of spicier oils. Cretans claimed theirs healed wounds faster. Athenians, they insisted theirs was sanctioned by the gods. Pure as Athena's wisdom, one merchant calls it. You stroll down a harbor path where large ships are being loaded with jars of oil destined for Egypt, Persia, and beyond. A sailor grumbles about the weight. "Next time, let's trade feathers," he says. The scene opens up, and you see just how far Athena's influence stretched. Her tree might have sprouted on a rocky hilltop, but its fruits sailed seas, paid taxes, settled disputes, and lit temples. What began as a goddess's gift became a commodity of empire. And through it all, the Athenians continued to trace their oil's legacy, not to farmers or merchants, but to the divine. Back near the Acropolis, you spot a small child clutching a toy amphora. "It's for my dolly's bath," she says solemnly. You ask what's inside. "Holy oil," she whispers, wide-eyed. Her doll, you notice, has a tiny painted helmet. You smile. Even in play, the myth lives on. You settle down beside a low stone wall and dip your fingers into a tiny pool of leftover oil, likely from some ceremony now long past. It's smooth, warm from the sun, and faintly bitter. But beneath that, something fragrant, something ancient. And as the scent curls upward into the breeze, you realize, Athena didn't just win a city. She won its culture, its rituals, its economy, and maybe even its bedtime stories. The sky above the Acropolis is dimming to a soft indigo, and the city of Athens hushes like a child being tucked in. But you're not done quite yet, not without one final visit to the roots of this whole divine tug-of-war, the olive tree itself. You wander back up the hill, past marble columns glowing faintly in the dusk, toward the Erechtheion. There, tucked beside the north porch, stands a lone olive tree. Or rather, a descendant. They say the original one planted by Athena herself was burned by the Persians and sprouted again overnight. "That's how you know it was divine," murmurs an old priest sweeping nearby. "Real trees don't do that." You crouch at the base of the gnarled trunk and run your fingers over its twisted bark. The wood feels dry, ancient, almost brittle, but the leaves above flicker silver in the wind like they've never aged. You wonder, did Athena choose the olive just for its usefulness? Or for its stubborn refusal to die? There's a scholarly debate about that, of course. Some argue the olive selection had nothing to do with divine foresight and everything to do with geography. Olives grow well in rocky Mediterranean soil. They don't need much water. Perfect for Athens, which is notoriously dry and rugged. Others say that's exactly the point. Athena gave them something sustainable. Something that would endure. And endure it did. You think back to the temple grounds, the workshops, the games, the markets. Olive oil touched nearly every aspect of Athenian life. Even burials. Mourners would anoint bodies with oil before laying them in tombs. The final gift of the goddess, they called it. One fringe belief from the time, that drinking a drop of olive oil under a full moon could connect you to Athena in your dreams. But only if you're wearing clean sandals, joked one source. You make a mental note to wash your feet later. You rise and step quietly around the tree's perimeter. The air feels cooler here, almost reverent. You imagine Athena standing tall beside it, her spear resting at its base, watching over the city she won. And Poseidon, still sulking in some distant sea cave, no doubt. Perhaps plotting a comeback involving kelp. Despite his dramatic entrance, earthquake, seawater, horse, Poseidon's gift had nothing on a renewable, multi-use agricultural marvel. His horse was flashy. Her olive tree was functional. And in the long game of civilization, functionality wins. But the contest didn't just decide who got bragging rights over Athens. It shaped the city's identity, its economy, its exports, even its worldview. A city built on wisdom, endurance, and quiet strength. A city that prized cleverness over spectacle. Olive oil over salt water. As you make your way back down the hill, you spot a small plaque nailed into the base of a stone wall. The inscription is half-worn, but it reads, "To Athena, bringer of light, guardian of fruit." Poetic. Understated. Like the goddess herself. You pass a group of children playing beside a tiny grove of young olive trees. One of them pretends to be Athena, a branch tucked into her headband like a makeshift helmet. "You shall not have this city," she cries in a high, theatrical voice. Another child stomps and yells, "I bring horses," but clearly lacks conviction. History repeats itself, even in playtime. You find a quiet bench at the foot of the Acropolis and sit, your limbs soft, your eyes heavy. You try to picture what Athens might have looked like if Poseidon had won. Faster, flashier, maybe richer in the short term. But the Athenians chose the olive, and by extension, they chose patience, practicality, and permanence. And honestly, not a bad metaphor for life. Olive trees grow slowly, but they live for centuries. They twist and bend, but they don't break. And even when burned or cut down, they sprout again, sometimes overnight, if the myths are to be believed. So maybe the story of Athena's olive tree isn't really about divine contests or civic loyalty. Maybe it's about finding beauty in the useful. About rooting yourself in what nourishes you, quietly, daily, even boringly. You lean back, your eyes closing, your body sinking into the evening. A soft breeze brushes your cheek. Somewhere nearby, an amphora tips and clinks gently against stone. A lone owl hoots overhead and you drift. And now, the olive tree stands quiet behind you, its silver leaves whispering in the night breeze. The city is still. The shadows have grown long and gentle, blanketing the streets in a soft, forgiving darkness. Somewhere, a breeze moves through narrow alleyways, stirring curtains and cooling stone thresholds. Even the gods, it seems, have closed their eyes for the evening. You sit back and let the night wrap around you like a warm shawl. The sounds are fewer now, no footsteps, no distant hammering, just the low hum of quiet sleep beginning to settle over Athens. The same stones you walk today have been walked for thousands of years. The same olive tree, or one just like it, has stood watch over generation after generation of thinkers, warriors, merchants, and dreamers. Let your breath slow. Let your limbs sink deeper into the earth beneath you. Picture the roots of Athena's tree extending outward, deep, slow, sure, tangling gently beneath the city's foundations, wrapping the temples and courtyards in ancient comfort. You're part of that now, if only for tonight. Just another quiet story beneath the leaves. No need to hold onto the names or the dates. No need to remember who won which prize or why the amphora was sealed. Just let it go. Let it all dissolve into that soft hum, that low hush of history exhaling around you. You're safe now. The myths are finished whispering. The goddess stands guard. Good night, traveler. And may your dreams be olive-scented and unbothered.